RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, Cyrisma.
And welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. We've been having this hot and heavy discussion about the whole Sunburst thing, and we were starting to get ahead of ourselves, so we had to take a quick break. Wanted to get back to the conversation, but do have a couple quick announcements first. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly related? You can do so by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or on the YouTube channel. And I apologize, it seems like the YouTube channel is having a little bit of difficulty today. Sorry, but the recording will be great. You can also sign up on our mailing list and, of course, join our Discord server, which is where things are really happening. At least they usually are on our show. Also, if you have any specific guest or topic suggestions for any of the shows, Security and Compliance Weekly included, you can submit your suggestions by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review the suggestions on at least a monthly basis, and we'll get back in touch with you once we've reviewed it. All right. We want to get back into it. I promised Josh that I would let him pick up, but I wanted to say one more thing to comment on something that Liam said in the previous episode about trust. If you want to have a really serious heart-to-heart discussion about trust in the context of Sunburst and what do we do about it and this type of attack and how long it lasted and how long it's been going on and how pervasive is it and, across society, let alone any particular industry, so on and so forth. I would simply ask, how does anyone trust any security professional or organization that's out there today, past, present, or future? Because this happened, and it happened collectively on our watch, and none of us knew about it. None of us saw it. None of us detected it until we get to FireEye. And maybe we should get people from FireEye on here. But even they didn't detect it immediately.
Jeff, the pen test should have found it.
Well, there is no security regimen, discipline, standard framework, and dare I say, no compliance framework, PCI included, that would have done anything to detect this type of attack. Maybe not. I mean, the only thing that I can think of that we need to focus on in terms of what do you do about it is monitoring, trying to detect what's going on in your network and finding stuff that's abnormal, which, of course, is so increasingly hard to do as the classic network has changed, and it's now hybrid, it's now virtual, it's now in the cloud. Nobody knows who owns what, where boundaries are. Segmentation, it's all ethereal, and there's so much traffic that nobody can look at it anymore, so you have to automate it and rely on tools and products and this, that, and the other. And that's where I just kind of want to say, yeah, I don't think you should spend any more money. Just keep doing what you're doing, because this kind of stuff is going to happen. And the best you can hope for is that somebody finds it and shares it with you, and damage is minimal. Josh, take it away.
That was a really, really short one little thing. Anyway, so
all of my things are short and never mind.
I'm not going there, Jeff, because the jokes are bad. Anyway, so
Not that kind
let's
of show.
talk. Okay, so we've got problems. And I think we all agree that security and compliance have massive problems. We've got problems in that once you're breached, we can't do much about it. And we have to work with you because, as somebody in Discord said, I apologize, I forget who it was, Microsoft, Cisco, and some other big names got breached already. So we can't just not work with them. They're kind of important pieces of our infrastructure and our equipment. What are we going to do?
That was DMZ.
Was it DMZ? Thank you, DMZ.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Scott. So there's the fact that once you get breached, we don't know how likely it is you're going to get breached again, and there's an insurance question there. There's the fact that security is deperimeterized, which was what you were just talking about, Jeff. And so we can't really keep track of things so incredibly wonderfully as we used to when we had a very close environment. And Jim, back when you could sit all of your threat experts around a table, everything was close held, right? So what do we do? And that's part of the problem here. We've also got the problem of, is compliance more important than security? Security more important than compliance? My thought is that they're symbiotic, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of questions here that we continuously fight about these answers, and we do it in a lovely way. I love being on the show, but it's a problem. It's a real problem. We don't have good, solid answers for, I don't think, any of these questions.
Well, you have to. It's all of the above, and that's what we try to look at. You've got compliance, you've got your assessments, and the assessments are great. They are recommendations. Everyone's happy when the assessment is over, so they get back to work and do what they need to do to make money. But the other side of that is the ongoing monitoring that needs to be accomplished. And I'm not going to mention the name of the company, but there's a firm out in the world today that's selling a rating system. If you get a rating from them, well, then you're safe. You've got that get out of jail free card.
I'm going to call bullshit on that, Jim.
All the other vendors. I beg your pardon?
I'm going to call bullshit on safe. Let's be clear on that.
Okay. I don't work for that company, and I'm not going to mention their name. But the point is they have this plan that if you get certified by them and you work with other people certified, well, you're all fine, and it's a perfect world. Well, I've had discussions with this company for the past 2 years, and it's like, well, what happens the next morning after your assessment is filed? We know that there are new state-sponsored, actors and hackers and everybody out there today, and they can hit you tomorrow morning. But you've got your grade. You're holding that A up and saying, I'm safe.
So,
well,
Jim,
really
it would be really simple to answer your question of what happens the next day. It's invalidated. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Exactly. But when you have 50 million in VC, behind you, telling the world that this is the answer. Well, those of us old gray-haired guys are out here saying it really isn't. You have to do something literally on a daily basis, or you're not going to be getting the truth. I look at the remote workers. Ever since COVID hit, everyone was sent home. We've got people doing, insurance, investments, military work. They're doing them on a computer on the kitchen table that their kid goes to school on. And we're trying to protect, our data and our companies. And you've got to look outside of the box of how you're going to be able to do this. And you can't look at some great big provider who says, I've got it all covered, because that great big provider was great when you had, you had 30,000 people in a building in Manhattan, and they tried to keep people from bringing in thumb drives, and they tried to keep people from using their own equipment. Bring your own device in. That was bad enough, but now you've got people working at home on flaky internet service. And, you know, I bet if I did a war drive out here in Steamboat Springs and just drove through town, I bet I could find 25 organizations whose Wi-Fi, you know, password was, you know, Steamboat 1234. It's like people don't think about this stuff, and everyone has to, and it can't just be up to the government. It can't be up to Microsoft. It can't be up to SolarWinds. Every company has to look at their own plan of what they need to do to protect their data. Now, I'm going to bring up a real nasty subject. Proposition 24 out of California, which was passed in November. Besides dealing with, you know, compliance and a breach and cleanup after the breach and maybe lawsuits, well, now you have the, you know, what do they call it? I call it the junta out in California, who's now is going to decide how much to fine you per lost record. And so just think if you were a car dealer and you had 1,000 people in your, you know, in your customer base, and you sold cars and you did body work and you did warranty work. Well, that's great. You've got a nice little company there. But what happens if your old system gets hacked and you lose 1,000 data files? Well, the state of California can fine you up to $7,500 per lost file. So this, you know, Joe, who you see on the 11 o'clock, you know, news waving his hands around about what a great deal he's going to give you on that El Camino. Well, now this guy's faced with a $7.5 million fine above and beyond everything that's going on. So I think personal, private financial information is very important. It needs to be safeguarded. But having an organization who then can just decide how much to fine you, well, you're going to watch businesses dropping like flies. And so, it's not just in California. There's something called the SHIELD Act in New York State. And so it's cropping up everywhere. The states can, you know, make money doing this, but they're not helping to solve the problem, you know?
So in the Discord, I Plead the Fifth of Whiskey says something really bright here, but companies won't protect their data unless they have a reason to. They need a why, because it's the right thing to do isn't profitable, right? So you bring up a bunch of interesting points. Where do we take this from here? How do we like, what should we be looking at from the view of an advanced threat company? What are the things that we should be looking at, right? If you could sit down and say, what are the top 3 things to be able to diagnose something like this based on actuarial data that you've seen coming through your company, what can people do?
Well, they've got to value their reputation too. They have to want to keep their customers. If you lose your customers due to a breach, well, you're going to go out of business. You know, there are no metrics, you know.
Right, but there's only been one company that's really gone out of business because of a breach. Everybody else says PR is PR. We don't care.
Well,
so how do you get around that?
I guess you look at it from kind of the Sarbanes-Oxley view of there's going to be accountability, there's going to be disclosure, and that's what has really helped the publicly held companies, because there are procedures, there's reporting, and it shows up on their 10K, and investors get to see this. On a smaller scale, the last thing I want to see is another government agency, you know, coming into force and then making all of us small businessmen fill out more paperwork and buy more licenses. But there has to be a common sense of evaluation of this, and there have to be some products and services out there at low enough price points that will help organizations better protect themselves. You know, I would rather be, you know, just a good citizen than to worry about a cop with a nightstick who's going to whack me on the head if I jaywalk. You know, I would rather take care of myself and the drivers around me instead of worrying about somebody whacking me with a nightstick. It's just there's got to be some common sense in here, and I think we've got a bunch of smart people on the phone here, And there has to be an answer to this. And it's not just going to be one person. It's going to be a group of professionals who are going to say, these are some best practices that we need to be looking at. And, fines and imprisonment and everything else can't be the driving factor behind, protecting, people's data and our critical infrastructure.
Let me throw another wrinkle into this.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
Jeff.
hold on. We are largely talking in the context of all these companies that are victims of breaches are somehow negligent. It's presumed that they're not doing the right thing from a security or compliance perspective. But we don't talk a whole lot, and I'm curious as to how it changes the conversation. We don't do a whole lot of talking about how these companies, organizations, at the end of the day, are victims of a crime.
That's very true. And the thing that I do a lot of writing on ransomware and malware and Trojans. And the thing, it turns it to be such a horrible situation that the phishing is normally the first way to get into a company. And phishing can be just as simple as, sending something that someone opens. You can play in social media and play on a particular person who's the executive assistant to, a CEO in a company. You can spend as much or as little time on this. But as soon as you get that successful phish, it then opens up the door to, TrickBot. And then there's even TrickBoot, which I wrote about last month. And that's how they're putting malware, into the firmware, which I just can't see how a fine against a company is going to protect them from something that we don't even know how to protect against. This is big. And, the TrickBot people have been around for years. TrickBot has been working with other, state, I call them state sponsored because they've got so many resources. But fining and regulating can't just continue to put people out of business when something happens. And that's, like I said, a group of us have to really think hard about how we can defend against this. When you start a business, you don't start a business to go out of business. When you're the principal of a company and you put your own money into your company, you did without paychecks, you built something because you wanted to employ people, you wanted to do something good. You can't have everybody go out of business because of something that a lawyer would say was, within your control, but knowing human nature, you got someone who clicked on something. And how can the punishment fit the crime?
Stop. Define crime. I mean,
the crime that you lost someone's information.
But that was stolen from you. Now there are instances where lost is legit. Like I have an unencrypted laptop. I left it in a taxi while I was drunk on, with whatever. Okay, that's you lost it. You were not the victim of a crime. But in most cases, and who was it? Whiskey. I plead the fifth of whiskey. Brought up, companies get robbed. They're actually victims of crime. So
exactly.
we're pointing the fingers at the victim, and there's negligence is one side of it. If you're negligent, like hammer of justice, great, I'm good with that. But if you're not incredibly negligent and you do everything that you said you're going to do, compliant, you actually run a pretty good shop, fairly secure, and you're safe, which Jim Gilson brought up earlier in Discord. But you're still, somebody broke in and stole records from you. You're also the victim of a crime. And I think that was just such a lovely point that I wanted to bring that out. When you said crime, we're pointing at the victim and going, you're a bad person.
And that's,
and I'm not sure.
That's
well, it's part of the culture. No, it's part of the culture that we've fostered over all of these years of doing security and pointing at somebody and saying, you did this wrong, right? In compliance, there are two ways to handle compliance. You can either handle it through regulation or you can handle it in the courts. And if we're going after this false mentality of you did something wrong, you should be punished for it. That doesn't make anybody want to be secure. Doesn't want to make anybody be compliant. It's like dealing with a parent, one parent who says, no, you're wrong, you're getting punished, and another parent that says, okay, you tried. Let's incentivize you to do better next time, to make a better decision. So
it's a very good point, because
realistically, it's a systemic change that has to happen inside of the community. I'm sorry, Jim, hold on. It's a systemic change that has to happen inside of the community for us to be able to incentivize businesses and companies to do the right thing. What that incentivization looks like, no clue. But it should happen in some way, shape, or form.
The other opposite of that, though, is if you look at it, so if you incentivize companies, right? You talk about government themselves are the first ones to actually basically ignore their own statutes. Give an example. Oh, don't send anything across the internet to us securely. But they're the first ones to actually send you insecure information that has a lot of sensitive information. But the recourse is there's nothing to hold them accountable. So therefore, it's kind of creates that, well, if they're doing it, we're going to do it. But then I'm held in responsibility. If I get caught, then I'm put the fingers pointed at me. But then it has to go from the top down. So government needs to be held responsible as well. So let's look at SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds is accessing many different things. There's is negligence on their part, but at the same time, they've got away with it for years, and now they got caught. So is that a crime against them, and they should be punished? And then what about all the other entities that got infiltrated because of that? Should they be punished? But what's happening is it's creating this mire in the web of having this blacklist of 18,000 companies that are now being compromised. Where do you say that the buck has to stop somewhere, and somebody can't do something and get away with it, and when you have another side that does it and gets told off or has the finger pointed at them?
It's got to stop. It's got to start with the pen test. It's got to start with the pen test. The pen test, right? And I'm not counting this one. The pen test is so destructive to that process, because SolarWinds can now sit back, say, just like FireEye, just like all the other companies, well, we're meeting the compliance regimes that require the pen test, but they don't require a third-party look into how our systems are being accessed, or they're not monitoring the right things, or it's a combination of stuff. If we go down that road of trying to pinpoint, we're never going to end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look at the CISSP exercise in the book over on the shelf here. It has a metric. What is the value of the information you're trying to protect? And they actually have put a metric on how much you should spend for information security to protect that. Is that a true metric of our industry going forward? And if you use it'd almost be like using AICPA guidelines or GAAP in saying, okay, I followed, the prescribed principles, and I have spent X number of dollars a year, and I've employed X number of people to do this, and I got hacked anyway. Is there going to be any break for someone who followed the rules because they were a victim? Or is the victim, as we've discussed earlier, Jeff, is the victim now the criminal?
So in the CISSP,
look at this as an organization and of professionals, not an organization of finger pointers.
In the CISSP, you're talking about the beer equals ale or times SLE, like that equation. Is that what you're referring to?
I can pull it off the shelf here and show you. It's one of the early exercises of making sure that you are properly protecting, your valuable, and they don't even decide what the data is. They haven't defined that, but it's your valuable, your asset data. And there's an algorithm that, we learned 20 years ago or whenever it all came about. But we've got to look at the reasonableness of this. And that's when the wheels come off. And that's when the junta decides how much to fine you because someone made a mistake. And who's the someone? Is the executive assistant who clicked on that? Is that person going to become liable jointly and severally because they clicked on something that caused a problem? This is so big. And we're dealing with governments, we're dealing with multinational corporations, we're dealing with state-sponsored actors. And your average business person out there is on the edge of being defenseless against their own government and the state-sponsored actors of trying to run their business.
So why won't the government allow us to, as prime targets, why won't they allow us to defend forward?
I'm not qualified to answer that question. If you're talking about offensive...
You're qualified to speculate.
Yes,
Yeah.
You can speculate.
Well, I have also, we have all sorts of methods for defending, because you get notifications and you're doing cyber threat intelligence to see who your next from whom your next breach could come, and then taking that information and putting it into another system to make sure that the actors can't get in. Well, that's only part of it, because it's as simple as it is. That person clicking on the typo squatted domain, or using the foreign language symbols and making a URL look legitimate. There are just so many tricks there. And most business people, male, female, all levels of management, they make mistakes. They're in a hurry. They've got a deadline. And I've always just looked at the situation of someone a boss demanding that you do a wire transfer outbound at 3:00 in the morning to somebody. It's like, really? You sent me this at 3:00 in the morning to send this guy $200,000? It's just, you got to think through this. There's a reasonableness on these things too.
Yeah, but the area that you're going into now is trying to expect a technologist to speak business and trying to ask a business person to speak tech. Right.
Well,
sure, we may be able to do all the user awareness training that we can think of and that we can muster, and we can always sit back and say, no, you did it wrong. But in actual practice, a lot of that training goes out the window, because it's not on a either month or quarter basis or a regular interval to really drive it home. Humans are animals of repetition, right?
That's true.
If you want somebody to be able to think, act right with cyber, it needs to be more than just an annual requirement. The annual requirement is a baseline, and that's what a lot of people don't understand about compliance, is that it is a baseline. It is where you begin to secure your environment to be able to deal with that kind of data risk, $, intrusion, whatever. So if you want to be able to address, if you want to be able to address these issues, you need to provide that training and that awareness to more than just the people in the business, but everybody, including third-party vendors, to ensure that they're up to your minimum standards and qualifications. You look at Walmart, right? Let's take a look at Walmart real quick. Walmart acquires a lot of companies, okay? And in acquiring these businesses, they say, you must be at least this tall to ride this ride and interface with Walmart systems.
Right.
Now, is that the end all be all? No, it's not. But what they're doing is they're setting a baseline for how everything works and saying you have to do training more than once a year. You have to do security awareness. You have to do all of the HR required training. And then there's compliance for systems on top of it. It's the layers of the onion that deal with the human element versus metrics and trying to pinpoint indicators of compromise for the systems. A lot of this is very disjointed in how it's implemented. And
that's very true, because you look at the C-suite, they want to make sure that their check marks are checked. Yes, we've had training, we've had awareness training, we've done the following, we've had an assessment done. They want to move on to what they do to make money for their shareholders. And unfortunately, a lot of compliance, even financial compliance, going back to my accounting career, it is like, oh, this is too much trouble. No, it really isn't. This is what needs to be done. And I think if we can get something similar along the lines of, AICPA or GAP involved in cybersecurity, I think it's going to become more common. It's going to be more consistent in organizations, that they know that they're going to have to, have. And we always said, well, what's the minimum compliance? What can I get away with doing? It shouldn't be what's the minimum. It's like, what's the best? What's the best practice that I can use here? And
Jim,
we're
what do you
talking
think about
about
CMMC?
everybody from, a medical clinic, a hospital, and I don't know, university. You look at hospitals and universities, they probably have some of the worst security ever because they're spread out. Money was spent on things that they thought was much more important than cybersecurity. And you've got to move it up. 20 years ago, I was out ringing doorbells trying to sell cybersecurity, information security. And more times than I would like to relate, I was told, well, Jim, this all looks really good, but this is number 11 on my top 10, when that meant no sale. And it was like, this was 20 years ago. I'm hearing cybersecurity isn't number 11 now, but you've got to get people to get the pen out and sign the contract to do something about it, not wait until there's news in the Wall Street Journal.
So Josh was trying to break in and ask you, what are your thoughts on CMMC and how is that going to affect the market?
Are you familiar with that, Jim? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, I am. I don't do that kind of work, but in CMMC, there has to be ongoing monitoring from someone other than the guy who finished writing the assessment. You have to be watching your perimeter, which people are pretty good at doing, but you have to be looking outside of your perimeter and seeing what threats are coming towards you. And I think that's one of the things that's missing. And NIST 800-171 was great, but no one wanted to complete the forms. And the government let them slide for a couple years on that because they could not work with these contractors, even though they hadn't completed the requirements. Well, CMMC came in, which is along the same lines, and I don't know all the other numbers after that, but I think Jeff can recite them. But it's a step, but it isn't watching. It's not watching your back 7x24 to see who's coming at you, who's the next attacker who's going to come towards you.
So technically, if you're paying for, I'm sorry, Jeff. If you're paying for assessments, if you're paying for like a C3PO to come in and do an assessment, like I don't technically understand exactly what you just said, Jim. Can you break that down?
Yeah, the assessment is where you are at one point in time. Where did you grade here? What are your areas of improvement? And then what are you going to do after the assessment has been filed? Like, what is your ongoing plan?
Okay, so what is your ongoing plan, and then how are you monitoring that plan to make sure that you're actually performing to the plan? Am I correct?
Exactly.
Okay, so monitoring aspects are very important. Making sure that you're performing to that plan on an ongoing basis. So you're basically saying point-in-time assessments are quaint, I think is the best way to put it.
No, I wouldn't say they're quaint. They're a requirement. There has to be a start, but I think they fall short of what needs to be done on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. So we can do a point-in-time assessment, but we have to do a monitoring aspect of that to make sure that it's continuing on around, 7x24, 8x5, whatever it is, to make sure that it's happening on an ongoing basis.
Yes, and this also goes back to what Jeff had said about the ongoing training. I've talked to many firms, and we already had that. It's like, well, when's the next one going to be scheduled? Well, we'll get to that next quarter. And then you have new employees coming in and out, and it's hard. The decisions we're trying to make today with the tools that we have and the resources we have, you're trying to balance out running your business and how much time and money has to or should be spent on cybersecurity.
All right. Let's take a step back. Let's take, you look at vendor risk management, right? We want to talk about where do we take a stance, whether we got regulatory compliance coming down, we got CMMC, but if we look at vendor risk management, right? Can we look at it holistically to say, okay, there's a cost to business if we don't meet a certain standard for that vendor and maintain that level of vendor and say, okay, we're going to work with you. Here's our standard. Here's our proof. Here's our attestation. Here's our artifacts. And we're meeting the requirement for us to maintain that level of business. And if we don't, we can potentially lose the contract. Then that funnels back up to the executive, the C-suite, because they still have that the checks and balances to say, hey, we've got this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. But then what happens if they start losing business because now they're starting to realize that that check mark is no longer good enough? We've got to have that maturity model so we can keep on going through that practice and that process inside of the actual application itself. So what do we do in there? So I think because if you look at vendor risk management now, it's become such a pain in the backside for a lot of companies that how many of them actually still get business, even though they may not meet the full requirement. The company will still work out a side deal to say, okay, well, then we do this, then we'll still give you the business. All right.
I hear you, Liam. And I wish there was a simple answer, and there isn't one. It's going to be, like I said, I've probably said it 4 times. It's going to be people like us really trying to solve the problem, not regulate it, and not fine you. Mm-hmm. It's just there are a number of pieces of this, and we could just on our fingers name companies that could probably take care of part or some of this, but it's an ongoing problem. And I've been watching the what is this thing called, the monitor over here, and people are saying that they still haven't had it figured out in accounting yet, but
right.
Accounting's been around a long time, and generally accepted accounting procedures been around for a long time. And information security, cyber threats has not been on Earth that long, and it's going to be an evolution. But those of us who are in the field here have to work on the evolution, on doing things better. And it can't just be a fine. It just can't be being in trouble. You've got to look really hard at your own organization and try to decide what you can do better and how you can keep from becoming a victim.
Well, it's because they're always constantly looking at inventory, right? Let's talk about EDI, the whole access, the order control system, where companies will continually do process improvement on that because they want to hit the SLAs that's required for their vendor or their partner to supply them and continue. As soon as that starts hitting impact, the potential to lose business is high. So they'll focus on that. I think me personally, I think there's the need for security as well with partners. When you're doing that type of business, a supply chain type of business to other entities, and you're going vendor risk, do the vendor risk management. I think there needs to be a start there. That the business, you talk about fines, regulatory fines, some regulatories, and then fines needed. That goes over, you look at PCI and the whole 9 yards, and you look at the fines that come out of there, and they're still in business, and everybody still does it because of desensitization. Oh, my credit card hacked into. Oh, you can actually go and fill in a form, and you get your money back. But if you lose business, you can't get that back. What's that?
You're missing a central point, though. Companies have not figured out the equation to account risk to dollars. Okay,
they never will, because until there's some profits lost.
Well, it's already defined in the CISSP. That's not the point. The point is there are more types of risk that companies are not accounting for outside of the CISSP equation.
That's true.
Yeah, but if you lose business, that's your loss. Because if you're not meeting the requirement for your partner,
monetary risk.
That's the difference of opinion, right?
So, gentlemen, let me jump in here because our time is nigh, and we need to wrap. And of course, we can continue our hearty debate over in the after party, and we can be set straight by our listening audience. I guess my 2 cents, and then maybe we'll do a quick around the horn parting thoughts, and then we'll close it up. So, 10, 15 seconds. My parting thoughts is organizations should not be immediately going out and spending more money responding to the marketing pitches and sales pitches that they're getting to do something. I think the knee-jerk reaction is, well, we have to do something different. We have to spend money. Where are we going to spend it? don't spend anything. Let's let us smart people figure out what's the best thing for you guys to do in the near future, whether it's more regulation, more compliance, more security, more or less fines. I mean, the fines is simply motivation. How do we motivate organizations to do the right thing? What is the right thing? I'll shut up because that was more than 15 seconds. Liam, parting thoughts.
Scott's right and I'm wrong.
Scott, parting thoughts.
We're going to continue to see breach stuff at least for the next 10 years, and no one's been able to figure this out, and we will not figure this out until people deal with the hard facts of what risk and transference to dollars means inside of the business.
Josh, parting thoughts.
That head is ridiculous, but hilarious as hell.
That's it. That's all we had time for. Jim, what is your parting thoughts?
My parting thought is I wished I had brought a hat up here and I forgot. But more importantly, I'm going to continue to beat my drum on working together to solve these problems and coming up with some realistic metrics and guidelines that can help all of us. As a salesman, I want to sell stuff and make money, but I also want to bring the value and the trust to each one of my engagements. And I think that is very important, because I'm not just selling something because that's my job. It's just we've got to look at this big picture and figure out how to work together to solve it, because it is getting worse every day.
All right, great. Very interesting discussion. And of course, as we suspected, or as somebody concluded on Discord, so we're just going to talk around things that we don't have answers for. Why don't we just skip the show? So we're going to jump over to the after party. Thank you for the discussion. Jim, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And we will, we're actually off next week, schedule-wise, so we'll be back in 2 weeks. So what you're doing next week when there's no Security Compliance Weekly, I would suggest that you go to Darknet Diaries and look for the episode that's going to drop on the 19th. Somebody that you know might be featured. That's all I'm going to say.
And the after party will be live.
And we're going to jump on over to the after party in just a moment. Thanks a lot, everyone.